Richard Connelly, Diocese of Gippsland, House of Laity. Mr. President, in speaking in support of this motion, I quote Ms. Greta Thunberg, who at 15 years of age, in addressing the 2018 UN Climate Change Conference said, "There is no planet B, there is no planet blah, 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 blah." Close quote. With this cryptic statement, Ms. Thunberg implored global industrial, corporate and governmental leaders to stop talking of climate change and to start taking action. This represents rising mobilisation of young people frustrated at world leaders' lack of action. The sentiment to make significant adjustments to reduce global emissions are supported by scientific evidence. The Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change's sixth assessment report into the Australasian region, released this year, states that the projected global warming under current global emissions reduction policies would leave many of the region's human and natural systems at very high risk and beyond adaptation limits. What will this mean for Australia? Well, the IPCC report projects likely results in failing to reduce emissions to include loss and degradation of coral reefs and kelp forests, loss of alpine diversity, likely collapse of forest ecosystems in southern Australia, the loss of natural and human systems in low-lying areas due to sea level rises, disruption and decline in agricultural production in southwestern, southern and eastern Australia, increase in heat-related mortality and morbidity for people and wildlife due to heat waves, cascading, compounding and aggregate impacts on cities, infrastructure, supply chains and services due to wildfires, droughts, heat waves, storms and sea level rises. I say also to this synod, blah, 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 blah. The time for talk has ended. The urgent need for action is now. These impacts are already being experienced upon this continent. And what has been our national response done by our government, representing you and I? Australia is one of the world's biggest per capita greenhouse gas emitters. Under the Paris Climate Agreement to tackle rising global temperatures, Australia set a target for 2030 of making a 26 to 28% reduction in its emissions compared with 2005 levels. These goals have been criticised for being too low, and last year the United Nations reported that Australia was not on track to even meet these. The Climate Change Performance Index rated Australia last out of 57 countries, which are responsible for more than 90% of greenhouse gas emissions on climate policy. Our nation did not attend the 2021 UN Climate Summit and has withdrawn from international funds to tackle climate change in developing countries. Australia remains the world's second largest exporter of coal, contributing to global emissions in third-party countries. The key policy response of the Australian government has been to commit funds to an emission reduction fund to be used in mitigation strategies that either have no scientific basis regarding their effectiveness in reducing emissions or are in technologies that do not currently exist. The global scientific community is aghast at the politics of climate change in Australia, with it being one of the most vulnerable countries on the planet to rising temperatures. Yet there is still rejection of the impact of rising CO2 levels on recent events of wildfires and storms and flood events. I commend this motion to this synod, Mr. President, in that our collective voice in being added to the voices of our young people, along with the growing mobilisation of people in the nation, may lead to real and urgent change required of our government in setting policies to address the impending impacts of climate change.